Hollywood doesn't destroy people with bullets. It does it with headlines, and sometimes with a prison number. Tonight, you're about to hear 10 LGBTQ+ stories that start in bright lights and end behind locked doors. Some were guilty, some were scapegoated, some were used as political bargaining chips. But here's the twist. The biggest punishment wasn't the cell. It was what the world did after. Stay to the end, because the final name proves fame can be the most dangerous cage of all. 1. Jussie Smollett. When the world wanted a villain and he was already a target. In Hollywood, there are two prisons, the one with bars and the one made of headlines. Jussie Smollett wasn't just an actor on Empire. He was a young black gay man in an industry that loves diversity on posters, then punishes it in private. Coming out isn't one clean moment. It's 1,000 small calculations. Will this role disappear? Will my fan base turn? Will my own team quietly tell me to tone it down so America feels comfortable? Then came the night that cracked everything open. Smollett reported he'd been attacked, and the story detonated because it hit real fears. A lot of LGBTQ people understood that terror in their bones. But police later alleged it was staged. A jury convicted him, a judge sentenced him, and he spent days in jail before being released pending appeal. Years later, the conviction was overturned by the Illinois Supreme Court on procedural grounds, meaning the debate didn't die, it mutated. Some people heard overturned and screamed innocent. Others heard procedural and screamed he got away with it. And here's the tragedy. No matter what you believe, Jussie became a symbol bigger than a human being. The internet didn't just judge him, it fed on him. If he lied, did he damage real victims? If he didn't, did the system crush him because it was easier than admitting the world is still dangerous for people like him? Either way, the punishment wasn't only legal. It was social. Hate, mockery, threats, isolation, and a career that may never recover. That's the cruel math of celebrity. One scandal can erase a lifetime of work, especially when you're already other. So tell me, was he a manipulator or a man who got swallowed by the machine? And even if he was guilty, did the spectacle become its own kind of violence? Drop your take in the comments, and if you're here for stories Hollywood won't tell cleanly, hit subscribe. 2. Joe Exotic, the viral outlaw who turned his life into a cage. Joe Exotic didn't just break the internet. He weaponized it, like a carnival barker screaming, "Look at me!" while the walls closed in. An openly gay man in rural America, Joe built a persona that dared people to stare. The mullet, the guns, the chaos, the husbands, the zoo. In a world that tells queer people to be palatable, Joe went the opposite direction, loud enough to drown out shame. But sometimes that loudness isn't freedom. Sometimes it's armor. Behind the memes was a trail of real-world consequences. He was convicted in federal court for a murder-for-hire plot targeting animal rights activist Carol Baskin, plus wildlife-related crimes. The sentence was massive. Decades of his life measured in concrete, razor wire, and fluorescent lights. And the question that splits audiences in half is exactly why this story works. Is Joe the monster, or the product of a system that rewards extremity until it destroys you? Because Joe's sexuality made him a spectacle twice over. First, as the shocking gay redneck people couldn't stop watching. Then, as the perfect villain people could hate without guilt. The ridicule came fast, and so did the dehumanization. When your identity becomes entertainment, your suffering becomes content. His life turned into binge-worthy drama while he sat in a cell, aging in real time, shouting into the void for a pardon that never came. But there's no clean redemption edit here. Animals suffered, Power was abused, people got hurt. That's what makes Joe Exotic radioactive. You can feel pity and still feel disgust. You can laugh at the clips, then realize the punchline is a human being rotting behind bars. So where do you land? Did the punishment fit the crimes? Or did the internet help build the gallows? Comment below and subscribe if you're here for the stories that don't come with a safe opinion. 3. Brittney Griner, a superstar trapped inside a political war. Brittney Griner's downfall wasn't a tabloid scandal. It was something colder: geopolitics. She was a WNBA champion, a global athlete, and openly an LGBTQ woman in a sports world that still asks queer stars to be quietly brave. That pressure doesn't always look like chains. Sometimes it looks like sponsorship meetings where your partner is never mentioned. Sometimes it looks like fans who cheer your talent, then insult your identity the second you miss a shot. Then she landed in the wrong place at the wrong time. Griner was detained in Russia after authorities said vape cartridges containing cannabis oil were found in her luggage. She said it was unintentional. Russia prosecuted. The sentence was severe: years in a penal colony, an environment defined by isolation, harsh routines, and a constant message that you are powerless. And as an American, as a Black woman, as a lesbian, her very existence became a headline Russia could use as leverage. What happened next split the audience just like every silent fame story does. The US negotiated a prisoner swap to bring her home. Some people celebrated, others raged. Would a non-famous person get the same effort? Was the trade worth it? Meanwhile, Brittney had already paid in a currency most viewers can't imagine: fear, confinement, uncertainty, and the feeling that her identity made her an easier target in a hostile narrative. Here's the brutal truth. Even after release, the prison doesn't fully end. The comments follow you. The debate follows you. The deserved it crowd gets loud. The she's a pawn crowd gets loud. And the person at the center is expected to carry everyone's politics on her back. So answer this. Was this justice, or was it theater? Using a queer celebrity as a bargaining chip? Tell me what you think in the comments, and subscribe for the next chapter, because this cage has more than one lock. 4. Ed Buck, the donor, the doorbell camera, and the men who didn't walk out. West Hollywood sells itself like a postcard. Rainbow crosswalks, nightlife, safe space. Ed Buck looked like part of that glossy promise. Wealthy, politically connected, the kind of name that floated through fundraisers like perfume. And that's what makes the story so poisonous. The allegations weren't about some stranger in an alley. They were about what happened behind a nice front door over and over until 2 men were dead. Federal prosecutors said Buck provided methamphetamine to Gemmill Moore and Timothy Dean, and that both men died at his apartment after Buck injected them. A jury convicted him, and a federal judge sentenced him to 30 years, 360 months in prison. But the drama details that keep people watching aren't just the sentence. It's the picture prosecutors painted of a pattern. In sentencing filings, the government argued Buck's apartment operated like a revolving door, with evidence including security camera stills showing constant visitors, plus trial evidence alleging he filmed men using meth inside. And then there's the survivor who turns this from rumor into horror story testimony. Dane Brown described being repeatedly injected, collapsing, being revived twice before he finally got out. His account helped push the case into a real arrest, not just whispers. Here's where the comments explode every time. Consent. Some will argue they were adults. They chose to be there. Others will say consent gets warped when one person has money, access, status, and the other is vulnerable, chasing safety, intimacy, or just a place to land. And because Buck is a gay man in a queer neighborhood, people fight even harder. Is this an individual predator story? Or an example of how power can rot any community from the inside? So, I'm asking you, did the system ignore warning signs because he was somebody? Or did it move correctly once the evidence finally forced its hand? Drop your take in the comments. 5. Ruby Corado, the trans savior, the offshore accounts, and the night the community went silent. Ruby Corado wasn't just known, she was needed. A trans immigrant who founded Casa Ruby, a refuge for LGBTQ+ youth and immigrants who were sleeping on couches, hiding from families, or surviving nights that could turn violent in a heartbeat. Then, her name became a betrayal headline. On January 13, 2026, Corado was sentenced to 33 months in federal prison and ordered to pay more than $900,000 in restitution for wire fraud tied to pandemic relief funds. Prosecutors said she diverted nearly $300,000 into offshore accounts in El Salvador, beyond easy reach of law enforcement. The courtroom details feel like a movie scene, except it's real life. Corado wept and told the judge she was overwhelmed, claiming she tried to invest the money into a shelter concept in El Salvador. The judge rejected the idea that her identity should change the sentence, stressing equal accountability, and said deportation was likely, ordering her to report to immigration authorities immediately. And the secret hook that keeps viewers glued is the collapse behind the curtain. Casa Ruby once served thousands, then unraveled amid allegations of mismanagement and neglect. Corado fled to El Salvador in 2022 and was arrested after returning in 2024, a dramatic arc that turns a community hero into a fugitive, then into a defendant. This is where your audience will split into factions. One side says, "You stole from queer kids. Nothing excuses that." The other side says, "Nonprofits run on chaos, trauma, underfunding. She cracked under impossible pressure." And hovering over all of it is the ugliest truth. When a trans woman falls, the internet doesn't just punish the crime, it uses the fall as evidence to hate every trans person harder. So tell me, was this calculated, or a desperate, catastrophic choice from someone who couldn't hold the weight anymore? Comment your verdict. 6. Chelsea Manning, the leak, the locks, and the war over her identity. Chelsea Manning's story is a pressure cooker. Patriot versus traitor, truth versus betrayal, while her own body became another battlefield. In 2010, as an Army intelligence analyst, Manning leaked a massive trove of classified material to WikiLeaks. She was convicted and sentenced to 35 years, then had her sentence commuted by President Obama in January 2017, leading to her release after nearly 7 years in confinement. But the part people can't shake, the part that makes the silent fame gold, is what happened inside confinement. During pretrial detention at Quantico, she was held under harsh prevention of injury conditions that drew international concern. Reporting and legal advocates described prolonged isolation and humiliating restrictions, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture criticized the treatment as cruel, inhuman, and degrading. Then came the identity collision. Manning came out as a transgender woman after sentencing, meaning every day behind bars also carried the message, "We control who you're allowed to be." And even after release, the state didn't stop calling her back. From March 8, 2019 to March 12, 2020, she was jailed again for civil contempt for refusing to testify before a grand jury investigating WikiLeaks, and she accrued $256,000 in fines. 2 days before a key hearing, her lawyers reported she attempted suicide. So here's the question your comments section will burn over. If you believe she exposed wrongdoing, is she a hero who paid with her sanity? If you believe she broke the law and risked lives, did she still deserve the kind of confinement that breaks a human being? Drop your take below. And if you're here for stories that don't come with a safe opinion, subscribe. 7. CeCe McDonald. Self-defense. Until the system said she had to give up that word. CeCe McDonald didn't walk into prison because she was looking for trouble. She walked into it because trouble found her first, outside a Minneapolis bar where witnesses and reporting described racist and transphobic slurs flying at a group that included a black trans woman just trying to get through the night. Then it escalated fast. A glass was smashed into CeCe's face, leaving a deep cut that needed stitches. In the chaos, Dean Schmitz was stabbed and died. Here's the detail people miss, the one that turns this into pure silent fame tragedy. CeCe took a plea deal, not because she admitted she was a monster, because the system made the risk unbearable. She faced murder charges that could have meant decades. The plea reduced it to second-degree manslaughter and a 41-month sentence. But the price was brutal. She had to give up the right to argue self-defense in court. And then came the second punishment. She served time in a men's prison while supporters screamed that the state was re-victimizing a trans woman who was attacked first. Free CeCe became a rallying cry because the case felt like a warning. Even when you survive, you can still be the one prosecuted. She was released January 13, 2014, after serving about 19 months. So where's the line? If you believe she was defending her life, this is a horror story about justice failing. If you believe a death demands punishment no matter what, you'll say the plea was accountability. But either way, the bikeach is real. A trans woman's survival became a courtroom debate, and the internet got to pick sides like it was entertainment. Was CeCe on trial for surviving? Or was the system doing its job? Comment your verdict and subscribe for the next name because it only gets messier. 8. Boy George, the pop icon who learned fame can't buy an exit. Boy George built a whole era on being unapologetically different. In the 1980s, being openly queer-coded in pop culture wasn't branding. It was a risk. The cameras loved him, but the culture judged him, mocked him, tried to shrink him into a punchline. And when your entire life is a spotlight, the fall is never private. The scandal that detonated his image wasn't a rumor. It was court. In January 2009, a judge sentenced him to 15 months in prison for false imprisonment after he was found guilty of holding a male escort against his will in his London flat. Reporting at the time described the victim being handcuffed to a wall, and the case hit the tabloids like gasoline. And here's the twist that keeps viewers hooked. Even lawyers reportedly expected something much lighter, maybe a short term, or even a suspended sentence. So the 15 months landed like a shockwave. Then, only 4 months later, he was released early, with reports saying he had to wear an ankle monitoring tag and follow strict conditions. To some fans, that looked like privilege. To others, it looked like a man being processed by a system that doesn't care how famous you are once the door locks. So here's the debate that will split your comments section. Do you believe in redemption arcs? Especially for someone who was already chewed up by public shame for being different? Or is this the kind of harm that fame should never soften? Was he a fallen icon who deserved the consequences? Or a broken man who still deserved a way back to happiness? Drop your take below and subscribe. 9. Bayard Rustin, the man who built the march, then got erased for who he loved. The civil rights movement had a secret weapon, and America tried to turn his private life into a public execution. Bayard Rustin was brilliant, fearless, and openly gay in an era that treated that truth like a loaded gun. In January 1953, after giving a speech in Pasadena, California, Police found him in a parked car with two men. He pleaded guilty to a morals charge often used to target gay men and served 60 days in jail, and he was forced onto a sex offender registry for it. And that's the cruel twist. Rustin wasn't punished only by the court. He was punished by the movement that needed him. After the arrest, he was pushed out of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and his sexuality became the lever people used to shove him into the shadows. Then came the political knife. In 1960, Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr. threatened to spread a false rumor that Rustin and Martin Luther King Jr. were lovers, unless King backed off planned protests. The result? King canceled and Rustin resigned from his role with SCLC. Imagine that. The man teaching nonviolence getting taken out by a threat of a headline. Here's the tragedy that should make your chest tighten. Rustin helped architect history, yet he had to watch from backstage because being gay was treated like damage. He built roads other people walked on while he was told to keep his own heart hidden. So tell me, did Rustin deserve to be punished forever for one night in a parked car? Or does every human being, even a flawed one, still deserve dignity and happiness? Drop your verdict in the comments, because this one always splits the room. And if you want the stories they tried to bury, hit subscribe. 10. Oscar Wilde, the celebrity they loved until his love spoke back. Before the internet could cancel anyone, Victorian England did it with a courtroom. Oscar Wilde was the brightest name in London until he sued the Marquess of Queensberry for libel, and the case detonated in his hands. The evidence flipped. The state charged him under laws criminalizing male intimacy, and on May 25, 1895, Wilde was convicted of gross indecency and sentenced to the maximum, 2 years hard labor. What happened next wasn't just prison, it was designed humiliation. Wilde was moved through Pentonville, then Wandsworth, and finally Reading Jail. Hard labor meant grinding routines like the treadmill and picking oakum, day after day, in a system built to crush identity into silence. And here's the detail that feels like a curse. At Wandsworth, Wilde collapsed during chapel, rupturing an eardrum, an injury later linked to his decline. He walked out of prison alive, but not untouched. Wilde had tried to give his suffering meaning, writing De Profundis, and later the Ballad of Reading Jail, turning punishment into poetry. But after release, he fled England, broke and marked forever, dying in exile in 1900. Society consumed his brilliance and criminalized his tenderness. So here's the question that burns across centuries. If the crime is love, who's really guilty? The person in the cell or the world that demanded the cell exist? If this story hit you, say it in the comments. And subscribe, because the loudest part of fame has always been the silence it forces. So, what did we really witness? Justice, obsession, or a system that loves a fall? These stories aren't here to shame LGBTQ+ lives. They're here to expose how power, fear, and fame collide. Now it's your turn. Who deserved the backlash and who was crushed too hard? Drop your take in the comments, keep it respectful, and if you want more Silent Fame deep dives, hit subscribe and turn on notifications.